Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is the weekend review show. It's kind of special because it's a holiday. It was July 4th here in the United States. Also Canada Day last week. That's cool. But a big holiday here in the U.S. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday now is all kind of like lumped together as a holiday weekend. So big numbers from Spider-Man Far From Home. As the biggest wide release opener this weekend, and the one we're sort of going to focus most of the show on, at least of the new wide release openers. We also had Midsommar come out, A24 art horror film. Ari Aster, his follow-up to Hereditary, also came out. It didn't do amazing, but we'll do a deeper dive on those two movies as we walk through the top 10 for this holiday weekend. We're going to do that. We'll talk about some smaller stuff that's out there, maybe some limited release things, and then we'll talk about what's going to happen here the rest of July. And we are in the full summer movie swing right now. This is it. This is like peak season is July 4th. Things start to quiet down a little bit later in July, although this year's going to be weird because we have Lion King, but after that, it's probably going to quiet down quite a bit. So let's dive into the top 10 here. So number one for the holiday weekend is Spider-Man Far From Home. The 3-day total, Friday through Sunday, looks like 93.6 million total for the 5-day. I guess it started on Tuesday. Is that right? Yeah. So total so far for Spider-Man Far From Home is at 185. First read on that is that's pretty freaking solid. Not mind-blowingly good, but like really a fantastic start for Spider-Man Far From Home. Let's take a look at and see what the critics are saying about this one. So Rotten Tomatoes score 91%, actual score 75 out of 100. It's one of those movies where everybody really liked it a lot, critics-wise. They weren't necessarily gushing over it, which is why the score of 75 is a little bit lower than you would expect with a 91% fresh score. But that tends to happen with comic book movies. I think just critics really like them. They think they're well crafted, but they're not kind of like high art, so they don't push into that 80-90 score for Rotten Tomatoes. Verified audience score is literally off the charts. 96% fresh score from people who bought movie tickets from Fandango. 94 out of 100 is the actual rating. All audience score very similar, 96% fresh score, 93 out of 100. Cinema score of an A. Post-track score of a 90, 76% definite recommend. So these scores are pretty much as high as you can get for a movie like this. Critics love it, audiences love it. That means the legs are going to be fantastic. Remember Spider-Man Homecoming came out, a couple of years ago? It didn't like pop off on opening, but had super strong legs through like 2-3 month run and ended up making a lot of cash. So I think it's going to be very similar here. This one had a bigger opening, and I think it's going to sort of cruise. And the big question here is it going to hit $400 million domestic? I think that's sort of the high point here. If it hits the 400 mark, then I think it's a massive success here for Spider-Man and for Sony. And I think that if it gets to that point, you're looking at least $200 million in profit, maybe higher to 250, 300, depending on what it does worldwide. So it would be a grand slam for Sony if that happens. I do think it's going to happen because of those scores too. Now what's coming up, you got Lion King coming up, so it's going to really eat into its legs a bit, but like ultimately people are going to go see Spider-Man because they love Spider-Man. Spider-Man in terms of films have been going on since 2002. Let's do a kind of brief history and see where we've come from here in terms of this series, because it's been a kind of ups and downs, and like this is the second reboot of the series in 15 years, 20 years. So Spider-Man the original, I'll do ticket inflated prices because I think it makes a lot more sense. So the original Spider-Man comes out May 2002. Unadjusted gross is 403, but adjusted gross is 626. So people forget how massive that first Spider-Man movie was. That was also, I think, the biggest year at the box office and kind of in modern times, the last 30, 40 years. Like that was just the pinnacle year, and things have been slowing down since then with ticket sales. The revenue wise, it kind of stays even and grows, but like actual ticket sales has gone down every year since then, essentially. But Spider-Man was one of the pinnacles of that year, one of the peaks, 626 adjusted gross. It was also like post 9/11. So like if you're younger, you probably don't really get that. But after 9/11 happened, like our culture, American culture changed a ton, pretty much overnight. And for some reason, people flocked to the movies that summer. I don't know. I think it was a lot of it had to do with escapism. But that was massive. And that's still the biggest movie in the entire series is the original Spider-Man in May 2002. Spider-Man 2 comes out 2 years later in June 2004. That closes out not too far off at 542 domestically, US, Canada. So massive. Unadjusted was 373. But also just like these films this is the start of the comic book movie sort of era. And the Spider-Man movies, especially along with X-Men, but I think Spider-Man even more, helped to create the MCU, the DCEU, the Avengers sort of worlds or tier of films where it's just like $500 million is a given for an Avengers movie. That just wasn't the case before Spider-Man came along. It was the first real sort of grand slam blockbuster on a different level that was happening and really helped establish the comic book movie genre as like an unbelievable sort of era in filmmaking box office that we're in right now. So the second one did fantastic, 542 adjusted. That was in the summer of 2004. Spider-Man 3, which is considered to be a train wreck. And I can kind of see why. I mean, I had never seen it. It's kind of weird for me. Following the box office is odd for the comic book movie stuff because I've never been a massive fan of comic book movies, and I can trace it back to seeing Spider-Man 2 opening weekend. I think I was in Minneapolis at the time, and I was in this like packed theater, and like people were just loving the movie, like totally into it. And I was like, this is okay. Like, why are people so passionate about this movie and laughing and like just I don't know. It just blew my mind. And ever since then, there's been this disconnect between the popular response to comic book movies and my response to them. I'm more of like a Logan fan or like a Deadpool fan. Avengers Infinity War is awesome, so I do love some of them. Guardians of the Galaxy, but like that was the moment where I kind of separated from the general audience, and I was like, yeah, I kind of don't get this, but you guys do your thing and let these movies make billions of dollars. Spider-Man 3 is kind of like the worst parts of Spider-Man 2 just amplified 100 times over. I watched it for the first time like a year ago, and it was like, how did this get made? Like, what happened? In any event, Spider-Man 3 did come out in May 2007, that summer. Closed out at 440, which is not bad adjusted at all. Like, not that far off from the second one, which is always kind of weird to me because you think about like, okay, it almost does $500 million domestically in 2007. Why didn't we do a fourth one? And there's probably a whole thing with Sam Raimi or whoever else was involved in that film as to why that happened. But it made a whole lot of sense to just continue that line of Spider-Man, like that specific narrative path that they were on. I think people just hated the third one so much. I can't really understand why they didn't do that. In any event, they reboot Spider-Man for God knows what reason into the Amazing Spider-Man, which comes out, and I completely missed this. I was living in New York. I was not following movies that closely. I didn't know any of these movies were coming out for some reason. The Amazing Spider-Man, which I've never seen, came out in July 2012, 5 years after the third Spider-Man. It closes out at 303, so $140 million off domestically of Spider-Man 3, so not very successful. But they come back for a second one 2 years later in May 2014, not that long ago, only 5 years ago, and that does only 219 domestic. So it kind of felt like a death spiral there. People did not like the Amazing Spider-Man 2 for whatever reason. And then we had the reboot Homecoming, obviously 2 years ago in the summer of 2017, that closed it at 337. So a huge uptick from the Amazing Spider-Man reboot, closer, but not really all that close to the original Spider-Man series, which all were near $500 million or over. Spider-Man Homecoming was very successful. I think Deadline says it made $200 million in profit. So really great. So we're back for a second one. But even before that, we had Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which did $190 million. And that only came out this last December. So its run ended this spring, essentially. So soon after that, we have Spider-Man Far From Home. Where is it going to end up? It's going to end up higher than Homecoming. I'll tell you that much right now. 350 is a lock on this. And I think 400 is a pretty good target for it. And in terms of that result, I think it's a very successful reboot. And now Sony has their own cinematic universe. I don't know the background to the whole Spider-Man Venom being on Sony's side versus everything going to Disney and Marvel. And now X-Men is in under the Disney camp because they bought 21st Century Fox. So Sony's kind of got their own thing now. Venom was incredibly successful last fall, which blows my mind. The movie was an absolute train wreck, a very fun train wreck, but a train wreck nonetheless. Now they have this as a success, which is going to make 350 to 400, probably $400 million domestically, and maybe $1 billion worldwide. And Homecoming. So now they have a series to build on. They got Venom to bring in. Woody Harrelson, I think he was at the sort of the deleted scene or last scene of Venom there. So I think he's going to be in the next big movie. So Sony's got something cooking right here. And I think that they're very happy with this performance, and they should be. This one cost less than Homecoming, 160, 165 in terms of its production budget versus Homecoming, which was 175. So this thing's definitely going to make a ton of money. And the quality is there too. I mean, comparing it to like other movies, and like let's look at like the film nerd score, the Letterboxd score, 78, which is very, very strong on that rating system. Avengers Endgame had an 84. Captain Marvel had 68. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is like the theoretical limit of a Letterboxd score. I've never seen it this high, 90. Like I've seen stuff in like the low 80s. If Avengers Endgame is in the low 80s, you think that's like the theoretical limit of like the highest score you could get on Letterboxd, but no, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I haven't seen, but I've only heard amazing things about, sits at a 90. Spider-Man Homecoming was a 74. So it's rated a little bit better than Spider-Man Homecoming, not quite to the level of Avengers Endgame, but higher than something like Captain Marvel. So I think everything points to this thing doing quite well. Who showed up for this? Males were 65 versus 35% for women. Way over indexed on the male audience, like extreme over index. I don't know if I've seen that maybe high once or twice before, but males definitely showed up for this. 53% were under 25 years old, way over indexed on that. Half of the audience there, 47% over 25. Usually it's reversed and then some. Largest quad was 18 to 24 at 29% of the audience. Diversity breakdown here was 43% white. That's actually pretty low. Usually they're about 53%. 25% Latino, which is higher than normal. 17% African American, which is also higher than normal. 15% Asian, which is double the normal percentage for the Asian sort of other category. So I think the minorities here, non-white folk, essentially were really showing up for this movie and really put it over the top. And so I think it's a huge win. The big question for Spider-Man Far From Home is, where is this thing going to go over the next few weeks? It's got Lion King coming out. I think everything feels like it's going to be a huge success and break that $400 million mark. And we should have a third one in this series probably in the next 2 years. So I think nothing but positive news for Spider-Man Far From Home. So that was number one this weekend. Number two was Toy Story 4. Looking at 34.3 million, a 42% drop, which is a good drop for a children's film. I wouldn't say good, kind of an average drop for a children's film, especially on a holiday weekend. But it's playing strong. It's at 306 million and its third weekend so far. Let's see where it's at compared to the other Toy Story movies, just because I don't really know how to quantify it all that much. I mean, 306 in your third weekend is obviously amazing. Let's see here. Yeah, it's way ahead of all of them. It's way ahead of the third one, like a good 20 million ahead. Well, 17 million ahead of the third film. So it's playing very strong. I think that there was this hype built into Toy Story 4 from the industry and from the sort of box office nerds. And it's been a little bit of a letdown in terms of it. Why isn't it blasting past $400 and $500 million? That's neither here nor there. It's going to be a win for Disney, and they're going to make a lot of money off of it. But I don't think they're necessarily going to be rushing out to make a Toy Story 4 in a couple of years. Maybe in 5 to 10 years, more towards the 10 side, they might make another one here. But I think it's performing quite well, and I think Disney will be happy with this performance overall. Number 3 this weekend was Yesterday, sort of the word of mouth hit here. 36% drop, did 10.7 million this weekend. Really strong. Added a few theaters. Per theater average is a healthy 4,000 in its second weekend for a movie like this, at least. Total so far is 36, almost $37 million here domestically. I kind of want to see what this thing is doing overseas. Not a ton, 20 million, so 56 million worldwide. But I think, I think the drops here are going to continue to be small. It's great counter programming to the Toy Story, Spider-Man, Aladdin, really big stuff. Plays a little bit older to a more adult crowd, over 25 crowd. Kind of, you can bring a family to it as well. So I think it's going to continue to play strong and sit around the top 5 here for maybe 1 or 2 more weeks. So that was number 3. Number 2 was Annabelle Comes Home, 9.7 million. Definitely a high drop, 52% drop, but actually not really as high as you would expect for a horror film. Especially, what is this, the 3rd sequel in the Annabelle series? So as the sequels go up, the drops tend to be higher second weekend, especially for horror. I would have expected like a 60% drop for this. So, and I talked about this last weekend. When you release something in this time frame, the holiday just gives you this extra boost. Annabelle Comes Home is already sitting at $50 million. Like, how is that even possible? Like, I hardly even knew this movie was coming out. And, if you look at the daily numbers compared to the other movies, it's behind the other movies. But, like, I don't think anybody expected this thing to play as well. The one that really does surprise me is still Annabelle 2. Was it Annabelle Creation? Yeah. That just played so ridiculously strong in that August 2017. It still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But this one's doing decently well. There's been a lot of chatter about, are they oversaturating the Conjuring cinematic universe? The answer is yes. We had The Nun last fall, which was a disaster, terrible movie. It was going to leave a bad taste in people's mouth. You had La Llorona, which was part of it, but then really wasn't. It was marketed as it was, but the connections weren't huge there. And I'm sure we have another Conjuring movie coming out soon. Who knows? Let me see if we can tell here from their future releases. They have It Too. This is Warner Brothers' New Line is behind the Conjuring cinematic universe. I don't see anything coming up here in the fall. Dr. Sleep, but that's a totally different thing. I wonder whether there's going to be another Conjuring movie. There's got to be one coming up eventually. Yeah, New Line Horror Film 2021. Maybe that's Conjuring 3. Is there a Conjuring 3? I don't even know. So, I don't know. It seems like it's doing okay and doing well. It's probably going to play like Deadline mentioned, just like The Purge did. It was last year, a couple of years back during this holiday weekend, where it's just going to money's just going to show up on the table for this movie, seemingly out of nowhere. And I think it's the only big horror movie out that's going to play to a general audience. Midsommar is not going to. We'll talk about that in a bit. So I think it's going to have some decently strong legs for, the third sequel. Wait, is it the second or third sequel? I guess it's the third sequel of Annabelle. So, which is a prequel to the Conjuring series. Don't even get me started. I think this is a win. I think it's doing well. It's not going to make $100 million, but it's definitely going to make a profit for Warner Brothers when this thing is all said and done. Speaking of profit, Aladdin, still in top 5 in its 7th weekend, 7.6 million. It has dropped 25%. These drops are absolutely insane. Let's take a look over the last few weeks and see what its drops have been. Second weekend drop doesn't really count because of the holiday was before. 53%. Third weekend was a 42%. It's been sub 30 drops for the last 4 weekends. 29%, 23%, 23%, 25%. That is insane for a movie of this level. This is a top tier blockbuster film. It should not be dropping that low. People are loving this film and they're going back to see it over and over and over again. I'm assuming it's because of the music and kids want to see it multiple times because that's what kids do. Did 7.6 million for the weekend. It's at 320 now. 320 million domestic. Worldwide, it sits at 921. Easily going to cruise past $1 billion on that one. It felt like a huge risk, but it really paid off for Disney. And I'm not even sure why. It can't be a good film because critics basically ripped it a new one. Guy Ritchie, is he really? Come on, he feels kind of washed up to me. That's why I didn't understand why they were going with him and trusting this huge brand to him. But it really has paid off. For whatever reason, people love the movie. And so it is still doing quite well with, I think, the lowest drop here in the top 10 with a 25% drop. And again, sitting at 320 domestic for Aladdin. Number 6 is a new one, folks. Midsommar from A24, an art house. I guess you call it a horror film, though that's already sort of up for debate from people who have seen it. And again, A24 with the old switcheroo. A24's motto is tell them A and give them B, is essentially how they market these art horror films or just art films. So what's the story on Midsommar? Midsommar is the follow-up from Ari Aster. Ari Aster did Hereditary, which is, I don't know if that was last summer, probably 2 summers ago, which was just a balls to the wall, crazy horror film that was like psychological, and maybe there's some cult stuff going on. Well, not maybe there's some paranormal stuff going on. It was absolutely insane, and not at all meant for a general audience, but they released it wide anyways, and it ended up doing okay. It broke $40 million domestically, but the cinema score was a D+. So people absolutely, the general audience who saw it hated it, and like really hated it. Did 44 total domestic. I wonder if I had any worldwide. Did 79 worldwide. And so like Hereditary, Midsommar is the follow-up to it. It's not a sequel, but it's kind of, it's A24, it's Ari Aster. It's kind of been marketed as a follow-up to Hereditary. Here's another crazy art house horror film. So, the expectation here was not super high, and it's kind of met that expectation. Did 6.5 for the weekend. It sits at 10.9, opened up on Wednesday, which is not terrible. By any stretch of the imagination. But let's take a look and see what people thought about it overall and see where this thing's going to go. Rotten Tomatoes score is 82% fresh, 75 out of 100. Very strong. Same score, 75 out of 100 as Spider-Man got. But here's where the discrepancy starts. And I called this weeks in advance, months in advance. I could have told you the moment it was announced what was going to happen. Verified audience score is 63%, which is horrendous. Very, very low. It's been going down the entire weekend. It reached like 70% a couple days ago, and I was like, this feels too good to be true. Because what was happening is like people like me who are super into horror films and art films rush out to go see it, and like, this is awesome. This is crazy. A, B, right? But the average person goes out and sees it because of the hype or whatever. They see the trailers, like, oh, this looks cool. They see it and they're like, what the fuck was this? And they give it like a C or a D. So what we're seeing here is that sort of separation, and the score's been going down since more general audience people are seeing it. So 68 out of 100 from audiences. That's verified audience who actually bought a ticket. All audiences very similar, 62%, or at a 67 out of 100. Cinema score of a C+. Post track of a 60. Definitely recommend, down at a 50%. So what's happening here is what everybody thought was going to happen. Critics and film nerds and film Twitter who love H24, who love Hereditary, are going to love this movie. Everybody else is going to hate it, essentially. It's going to be a massive divide. That's exactly what's happening. Letterboxd score is an 80 out of 100, which is like insanely high. Hereditary got a 78 out of 100. Annabelle Comes Home was a 56. Us was a 76. It's higher than Us. Child's Play at a 58. So it's playing way above, and this is like a very specific group of people, film nerds, film snobs, film Twitter, on Letterboxd. They love this movie, especially compared to like Annabelle, the more genre major studio flicks like Child's Play and Annabelle Comes Home. Those are scoring the 50s. This is up in the 80s right now, which is high. I can't believe it's higher than Us. Now it might change a bit, but like, so clearly that small group of the audience loves it. The critics love it, but the general audience is like, what am I watching? This is insane. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, Ari Aster has a certain style. He's into very long takes. He's not really into jump scares at all. This movie actually may not even be a horror film. It may be more of a thriller. And it's an extended metaphor about the dissolution of a relationship. I don't know if the average movie-going audience wants to see that long extended metaphor in an art film about a breakup. Like, it clocks in at 2.5 hours. It released in the summer. It's a very difficult film. Very difficult films play well with critics, and they play well with people who pay attention to film. They don't play well with the normal person, because those people are not normal. And I don't mean normal in terms of better or good, but it's just like the general audience who works 9 to 5 in a whatever job goes out to see this thinking it's a horror movie. They're thinking it's Annabelle Comes Home or La Llorona or Child's Play or even like Happy Death Day to You. And they get like this super arty, weird, eccentric art piece, and they just don't like it. And so like this was going to happen. 58% male showed up to this, 42% female. Kind of makes sense. A little bit overindexed on the male in terms of average audience. 76% were between 18 and 34, which is massively tilted towards the more youthful audience. Largest single quad was 25 to 34. That makes total sense because it's more like a later 20-something, early 30-something type film. It's very cool and hip, right? At least for adults. 62% white makes sense. 15% Latino, way under-indexed. 12% Asian, over-indexed. African American, 11%, a little bit under-indexed. So white people and Asians went to go see this. Latinos and African Americans did not, weren't as sort of hyped about it. Played really well on the coasts, of course. This is a Los Angeles, New York film, San Francisco film, Chicago, urban centers. Anywhere else probably did not play all that well. I don't know. I don't know what the strategy here is from A24. I think, from an artistic perspective, it's a big win for Ari Aster. Now this is his second sort of home run as a horror filmmaker with that specific group of audience. But keep in mind, that group and audience are the people who go into filmmaking, who write about film, who are in the industry. They are the vanguard of who makes films. So if they love it, we're going to see more of this stuff, even if it's not like a financial grand slam. And in terms of the money making on this, it cost less than $10 million to make. Marketing was mostly social, so they probably didn't spend more than $20 million to market this thing, maybe 30 if you're lucky. So you have a total layout of $40 million. It's only made $11 million so far. Let's see what it does internationally. Does this even have it should have an international audience, I would think. No, it has. I don't think it's just open domestically so far. I don't even know if A24 is looking for a huge, they're probably looking for a huge financial payout, but I don't think they're expecting it from a movie like this. This is like a coolness factor. This is like almost like a marketing play on some level for the studio, because they know this movie is going to play extremely well with the right group of people. Is it going to make a ton of money? I don't see how it's going to. I'm sure Hereditary made some decent money, a decent profit off that. Midsommar's definitely not going to match that. It's way too low coming in right now, which I could have told you 3 or 4 months ago. But it is interesting. It's like it's a brand new type of story that we haven't seen at the box office recently. It's new, it's unique, it's original IP. Ari Aster wrote the script. It's a fascinating movie and film. It's just financially at the box office, it's not going to set off any fires here. It's just going to be a kind of a quiet run for this. With that cinema scores being super low and that verified audience score in this low 60s, I don't think the legs are going to kick in all that well for this either. Although keep in mind, Hereditary did opened wide at 13, which I very much criticized, but I think I was wrong there because it ended up to have over a 3x multiplier. So maybe this thing can kind of leg it a bit and hit the $30 million mark. I think A24 will be very happy with that performance. I think there was in the back of their mind, they thought, maybe this thing's really going to pop off with the holidays and open up to like 15, 20. And it goes on to make $50 or $60 million. I think they maybe in the back of their head thought that might happen, but that's definitely not going to happen here. So that's Midsommar, $6.5 million for the 3-day, 10.9 as a total so far. Then at number 7 here, we have Secret Life of Pets 2, $4.7 million. Good drop, 35% drop. Starting to lose a lot of theaters, lost 500 theaters. Sits at 140 right now. The story in this is it's nowhere near the original, not even the same ballpark. It's still going to make some money probably. It's not going to lose any money, but at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to see a third one anytime soon from Universal. Number 8, Men in Black 2 International. 3.6 million, 46% drop. This one's not doing well at all. $71 million total so far. Maybe international can help it out a bit. 172 foreign, so it's at 244 worldwide right now. I just don't think that like it's not good enough. Obviously, it costs 110 to make. Total releasing costs were well over $300 million. Like, this is not going to break even. It's going to lose quite a bit of money, I believe. So it continues kind of a not a great performance. Number 9 was Avengers Endgame. I think this is kind of the new released footage. 3.1 million, 49% drop. That's pretty good. It's in 2,000 theaters still. 847. It's never going to catch up to, at least not in the near future, catch up to Force Awakens for the domestic total. Let's see where it sits international and see. Okay, it's at 2772. Is that updated? Let's see if it's updated for... Okay, it's not that far off. It's only, about 10... It's only about 10 million. No, wait. It's about 16 million off of Avatar for the worldwide run. I'm sure they'll find a way to make that money up and have it be the biggest film of all time, at least in box office perspective, unadjusted, of course. But yeah, it continues to do well. Number 10 was Rocket Man, 2.7 million, 29% drop there, really good. Again, I talked about this last week. I thought this was doing really well. It is in the United States. Like, 89 million for a movie like this is really good. I think the problem is, like, international, it's done 173. Production budget was 40 million. Total releasing costs were probably, I don't know, $120 million or something like that. I think it's going to make a profit. I think it's going to do well. I think it's going to win. It's just not anywhere near the Bohemian Rhapsody level of a win for the movie biopic, and I think we just got really spoiled with that performance, and it's not anywhere near that. So it is a win for Paramount. It is doing well, but it's just not in that realm of like $100 million profit movie. Okay, so that's the top 10. Just outside the top 10, just a few movies here. John Wick, sitting at 165 in its 8th weekend. Huge, great performance for that movie. Child's Play's kind of bombing out, $26 million on its 3rd weekend, 66% drop on its 3rd weekend out of the top 10. Awful. Late Night, number 13, sits at 14.2 million. Huge flop. Would have been a huge flop if they didn't spend $35 million to market it, but they did. It's not working. Dark Phoenix. Oh, how is this thing? Oh, how is it hanging on? $64 million by its 5th weekend. It should have opened at 64 easily. Biggest bomb of the year. Just what a sad whimpering end to the Fox X-Men series. I think people are just kind of relieved that it's going to Disney now, and they're going to be able to reboot it and make something great out of it, hopefully. Ike on the Canyon art film, $2 million in 7th weekend. That's pretty good. Last Black Man in San Francisco is kind of one of the better limited art house performers this summer. But it's not even really doing all that well. $2.8 million here in its 5th weekend. So not great. Wild Rose, I never talked about this one. Limited release, total debacle. Not doing well at all. They're doing sort of a roadshow release here. It's only in 63 theaters. It's added 47 last weekend or this weekend. I just don't see it making any real money. It's going to even struggle to make $1 million, it looks like. Dead Don't Die still around, 6.3 million in its 4th weekend. So that really didn't go anywhere. I didn't think it was going to. It kind of had a super, super niche audience. Anything else out there that we can talk about? Dumbo's still around in its 15th weekend. God, Dumbo did so bad. It's going to be a weird contest for the biggest flop this year. You got Dumbo, you got Dark Phoenix, you got Men in Black. You got all these movies that are just doing so bad. But it might go to Dumbo because I'm sure they spent $170 million to produce this thing and it's only made 100 essentially in the United States and Canada. That's a disaster. Okay. That is mostly everything out there that's going on. I mean, the headlines essentially from the top 10, top 20. Midsommar does expected. It's not going to make any real money, but that wasn't the point of the movie. The point was to make a really good art horror film, and I think that they did that. And it gets A24 and Ari Aster's name out there again as like, this is where you go to make really cutting edge horror films. And just cutting edge films in general at A24. Spider-Man Far From Home is a big win. I think its leg is going to be fantastic, and I think it's going to make $400 million domestic. And everything else is sort of, we've talked about a lot yesterday. I think keep an eye on that one as a word of mouth win here. So that's mostly it from the new stuff. Let's talk about what's going to happen here over the next few weeks and kind of close out what's going to happen at the summer here. Summer 2019. We're over the hill. We're on the backside of the summer now. So let's see how this thing's going to end up. This weekend we have Crawl and Stuber. I have a lot of money riding on Crawl doing well. I think it's going to break out. I don't know why. I can't tell you why. It's just like one of those monster movies that you'd see on sci-fi in the afternoon, but like well done. I think it's going to get people to go out and see it. I think like teenagers are going to be bored and be like, let's go see this stupid alligator movie. It just looks dumb and fun. I think that's what people want this summer. I think it's a good release. Stuber, I just don't think it's going to do very well. There's not a lot of hook to it. Some limited stuff. Art of Self-Defense is supposed to be very good from Bleecker Street. Farewell from A24, and then a couple IFC films are coming out this weekend. And then we hit Lion King on July 19th. Who knows? I have no idea where it's going to open. I would say 180 to 220 opening weekend. It's one of the biggest, the original is one of the most beloved films of all time, especially for younger people. This is the remake. I get the feeling it's going to be massive, but I think there is a possibility that it kind of plays like a Toy Story 4 where we think, oh, what is this, like 150 to 170 to 180 to 200 we were thinking about right before, and then it comes in at like whatever it was, 120, 130. There's a possibility that Lion King could repeat that sort of ballooning of expectations, and then it pops a little bit. I just don't think so, though. I think people just are too rabidly in love with Lion King. From like 5-year-olds to like 50-year-olds. I just think it's a 4-quad smash hit already. So I expect it to do about 190 to 200 would be my expectation opening weekend. It's just a weird fucking July, folks. It's so weird. So after the pop off of Spider-Man, we have Lion King, and that's it. That's the end of July. There's nothing else really coming out that's massive. You have the Quentin Tarantino movie. That doesn't really count. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood comes out on the 26th. That's not a blockbuster movie. I've shorted that in the Hollywood Stock Exchange. I just don't think it's going to do very well. I don't think there's enough Tarantino fans. I don't think there's enough like I'm really into Hollywood in the 60s fans. Those people are all dead, right? Like I just don't see what the draw is here besides Tarantino and the stars involved. I just don't think it's going to do all that well. Really, I think a really quiet end to July 2019. And then I think August does pop off a bit with Fast and the Furious, Hobbs and Shaw on the 2nd. Then we have a few different movies. The Kitchen looks like it's going to do pretty good. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I can't tell if that's good or not. Like, it's from Lionsgate, so it's probably not good. Let's be honest. Lionsgate is terrible most of the time. But I just felt like there was be more buzz for such an interesting, like, a huge book of my youth, The Scary Stories. I used to check it out from the library like once a week. I just thought there'd be a lot more going on with that, and there's not. Dora and the Explorer. This is all in the 9th. Art of Racing in the Rain. I don't know that one very well. It is a wide release, though. Kevin Costner? Who is in this movie? So, a really busy early August. And then it kind of continues a little bit. August is a little bit more stacked than July. Not even a little bit, a lot more stacked. They're not all like winners, but there's pretty big movies. 47 Meters Down, Uncaged. I think that's going to be a big movie. I'm not going to say big, like opens at 20, closes out at like 50. That's what I mean by big. Good Boys, The Informer, Where'd You Go, Bernadette. Those should be like mixed. Where'd You Go? It's United Artists releasing, so it's going to flop. Aviron is The Informer, also going to flop. But I think Good Boys and 47 Meters have a chance to do pretty well. Then you're talking the Angry Birds movie 2 on the 14th. That's actually the same weekend. So like it's really stacked. There are so many movies coming out. Maybe they learned from like the 2 Augusts ago when they released Nothing in August and everything like came crashing down. From the 2nd all the way through the 16th, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 wide releases. That's huge. In the last 2 weeks of July, we have 2 wide releases. Just throwing that out there. So they're pushing everything later this year. I don't know if that's a smart move. Like, why would you push out Scary Stories to Tell in Dark and early that second the 26th of July. I would open a lot of movies on 26th of July. Who cares about Lion King? Sure, Lion King's going to rule for the first week, but like pick up the scraps on the second weekend. On the 14th of August, you have Angry Birds 2, which is a wide release from Sony. Blinded by the Light from Warner Brothers, which kind of seems a little bit like yesterday almost. And that's your August. Well, that's not even the end of August. I just don't. It's almost like they're making the reverse mistake as they made 2 years ago by overstacking August and like forgetting about the end of July. The 23rd has 3 wide releases. August, Angel Has Fallen. Is that a Gerard Butler movie? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. Is this the third in the Gerard Butler Secret Agent or Secret Service? This London Has Fallen, Olympus Has Fallen. These movies are so bad but fun to watch. I don't think it's going to do very well, but it's not going to do bad. Also, keep in mind that the end of August is like the doldrums, like the ultimate dip in the market. And then September is usually one of, if not the worst month at the box office. It's even worse than January, February sometimes. So things get really quiet down here. Angel Has Fallen, My Spy comes out from STX, Overcomer comes out from Sony. Those are all wide releases. Is that a cricket movie? What the hell is Overcomer about? Maybe not. It's just a religious movie. Ready or Not comes out from Fox Searchlight on the 21st. That's a horror movie. That looks kind of fun. Almost like The Most Dangerous Game. And then Playmobil, which is like those toys that were like cool in European when I was a kid. That comes out from STX. And that's the end of the summer. So it's a very strange end of the summer. It's going to be like quiet outside of like 2 or 3 movies until August. And then we're just going to get like, inundated with new wide releases. Who knows how well they're going to do. And then like, I just want to take a quick glance at September. I don't want to go too far into it, but like, It Chapter 2 opens up on that Labor Day, the week of Labor Day, it looks like. And then you got Goldfinch, Hustlers, Ad Astra, Rambo Last Blood. Very typical fall fare that we're going to get. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys. This is the Wildline Podcast. I will be back next weekend. Thank you. Bye.